Hey guys, GCSE with TMT here. We're going to be doing characteristics and classification of living organisms within the CIE IGCSE Biology specification. Now, we're going to be going through the syllabus, which is why the video is a bit longer, which means we're going to be explaining each point that the examiners want you to do. Meaning, if you finish this video, you should be able to do most of the questions. Now, if you struggle in some of the paper 4 topics or the written topics, that's because the exam sort of questioning is what you're not used to. With time, towards the end of the playlist also, if it is done by the time you're watching this video, you would be able to see some of the questions, especially the longer ones, being solved in our past paper walkthroughs, okay? So the main thing I want you guys to focus about is the content now. Go through it, write notes if you want to, and focus here and there for the tips and tricks that I'm going to be dropping, okay? So there's going to be a lot of content ahead of you. Get a drink, maybe a snack if you want to, but I want you focused in this lesson. So without further ado, let's just get started. Now, the first thing the specification wants from you is to be able to know the characteristics of living organisms. Now, there's 7 of them, and they're sort of classified or grouped into the acronym Mrs. GREN. Now, you must have heard this before. Mrs. GREN is just basically linking each letter of the 7 characteristics, okay? So the M here for this M, and the R here for this R, and so on. Now, I'm not going to explain movement because it's really self-explanatory. I'm going to explain the things that a lot of people get wrong. And I want you guys to memorize these definitions. These are the ones that your exam board is giving you. Why are you going ahead and memorizing different ones? Okay, I don't care what the teacher has given you. I care what the exam board wants. Okay, this is the 2026 exam specification, guys. This is as new as it gets. Okay, so you want to know these definitions off by heart because they come up in your paper 4s or your paper 3s if you're doing core. And they also come up, the concepts of them, in your MCQs or multiple choice question papers, your paper 2 and 1, okay? So if you want to be ready for your boards, I would say just memorize the definitions that are here, okay? Now, the thing that people get wrong in terms of concepts is, for example, respiration. Respiration does not mean breathing, guys. It does not mean breathing. It does not mean taking a breath in and out. It means energy released, not created, because a lot of people write created. I'm not even joking. About 10% of students write created, which loses them a lot of marks, okay? So that could be the mark that gets you the A star, okay? So it's released. Write that down, okay, guys? It's released, not created. So energy released for metabolism, okay? So your body's breaking down these nutrients, which releases energy for metabolism. That's what respiration is, okay? And that's a characteristic of living organisms. Okay, so that's something that all living organisms do. Clear? The next one you need to know is sensitivity. Now, sensitivity is basically an ability to detect stimuli, okay? So you want to memorize this definition, but the way I try to understand it is if there's something that's changing in your environment, you want to be able to sort of change either internally or externally. So, for example, if a predator comes to attack you, you might want to lose your tail, okay? And that somehow defends you as an animal. That is not what people sometimes confuse as excretion, and I'm going to explain it when we get to excretion. That is sensitivity, okay? Another example is growth. A lot of people misdefine this or incorrectly define it, and the actual definition is a permanent increase in size and dry mass. So both of those you want to remember for the definition of growth. Now, for reproduction, I think that's straightforward. Now, moving on to excretion, guys, a lot of people get this wrong, okay? It's the removal of waste products. So things that are a waste product is, for example, urine. So waste products of metabolism and substances in excess. For example, this is something you want to remember. For example, some companies that sell supplements like vitamin C or vitamins, they would sell you 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C when all you need is 70 milligrams or 1 milligram per kilogram. So if you're 50 kilograms, you'll only need 50, okay? So they'd sell you 1,000 milligrams to seem like it's something that's all cool and nice and oh, it's going to be healthy. But in reality, what are we doing? We're doing excretion because it's an excess of the requirement that we need, okay? Because the requirement is only 70 milligrams. Is that clear? So 930 milligrams would be in excess. All right, so that's excretion. So when we go back to the example of the lizard I gave where it loses its tail, the tail is neither a waste product of metabolism, like CO2, or a substance in excess of requirements. So when you lose it, it's because of sensitivity to them feeling a predator come, they lose it. It's a defense mechanism. Okay, guys? And the last one is nutrition. Just remember these 3 key words when you're talking about nutrition, okay? And then I would just go ahead and memorize them, okay? Or memorize all of these. They're very important and high yield to remember, very, very likely to come up. We're only going to focus on the high yield stuff. We're going to go over 99% of the spec, but the high yield stuff, one of them is this, okay? Now, 1.2 in the syllabus says concepts and uses of classification systems. Now, the first point they're saying here is that state that organisms can be classified into groups by the features that they share. I think that's very straightforward. So if a lot of organisms share similar features, they go into similar groups, okay? That's really straightforward. And one thing you need to memorize here is defining species. They are a group of organisms that can reproduce to produce fertile offspring. This is the sentence that loses you the mark if you don't do it, okay? Produce fertile offspring. Memorize it, please. That's why I say, guys, you have to remember the definitions from the syllabus itself, okay? So this is one you need to know. Now, the third point is describe the binomial system of naming species as internationally agreed. Now, the story behind this is as follows. So the scientists were like, okay, we need some naming system that works in Brazil, the US, that works in Middle Eastern countries, in European countries, whatever it is, okay? In Asian countries. And we can't be using different languages because scientists can't agree upon names then. What if we want to talk about some bacteria, let's say Staphylococcus aureus, okay? We want to talk about this bacteria and we want everyone to understand what we're talking about, okay? If we want to do that, we're going to have to use a specific system. And that system consists of two parts, okay? The genus and the species. Now, a lot of people just go ahead and they're like, oh, okay, genus, species. So humans are Homo sapiens. Now, you're right, but you're not quite right. When you said Homo sapiens, you've said it right. But when you write it, there are rules you need to remember. Now, the two rules I want you guys to remember, first one being the order of what you're writing. The first word is the genus. The second one is the species. The second rule is how you write them, okay? Within that second rule are another two rules. The first letter needs to be capitalized in the genus, which is Homo, the H. And then sapiens is small. The second rule is, the S here is small, okay? So the second rule is the whole thing is written in italics. Now, italics just means the text is sort of leaning forward. When you're writing it, they don't deduct marks. So if it's in your written paper, you don't have to do it in italics. Try to. I would do it in italics. Because if they're being sneaky, they can deduct marks. But a lot of the time, they don't because you can't really write in italics. But in the multiple choice question paper, they can give you two options and be tricky. And one of them is in italics and one of them isn't. If you don't know what italics is, just Google it. But that is the main idea of using the binomial system. Okay, guys? Now, the evolutionary relationships point that they're talking about here, and to go back to the dichotomous keys, I'm just going to show you an example when we're doing the question. They're basically these keys that you have to jump from one question to another to be able to reach a conclusion about a species. Now, for option 5, they want to talk about evolutionary relationships. Now, the thing I want you guys to remember about this is, let's say you have a human and you have, I don't know how to draw monkeys, but let's say you have a monkey. Okay, you have a monkey here and you have this human being, some nice shoes, maybe a nice watch, interesting hands, but let's say these are their hands. Okay, and then you have some horse. Okay, guys, please, I can already see like someone in the comments saying, what's this horse? Just get to the point, okay? So these two would have a common ancestor, which is closer to each other or more recent than with the horse. So the closer the two things are in terms of size and shape and color, the closer the two species are in terms of size and shape and color, the more common, the earlier their common ancestor is, or the more recent their common ancestor is. And the further apart they are, the less like they are, or the less matching they are in terms of their shapes and characteristics, the further common ancestor, okay? So a horse would have a further common ancestor with humans than a monkey, okay? That summarizes this point also, okay? Now, that's not really accurate in terms of just seeing organisms, because that causes a lot of problems. And it's really subjective, isn't it? I could see that organism looks like that one, more like someone can come up and say, okay, I see the monkey looking like a horse more than I do the human. Now, they would be delusional, but we need something more concrete, more objective, okay? That's where DNA sequences come in, okay? Now, DNA sequences are basically just a fancy way of saying these orders of letters that are showing us what DNA is, okay? What the bases are in DNA. Now, the details of this you don't really need to know yet, okay? For this video. But what we're gonna do is, we're just gonna show you these pairs that, this is a common MCQ question, by the way, multiple choice question, where they give you these base sequences and you have to be able to classify them. Okay, to be able to say which two are more closely related. This is more accurate method than any other method because you can literally see the numbers, or the letters, sorry, and be able to classify them accordingly. So let's say we have these three organisms, A, B, and C. Now, you can see that the base in organisms A and B overlaps a lot more than it does between animals A and C, or sorry, organisms A and C, and B and C. So the more overlapping that happens, the closer the common ancestor is, or the more recent, the more recent the common ancestor is, because they have more common features, okay? Or because their sequences overlap more, okay? And this summarizes point 7, which gets us through point 1.2, okay? So 1.2 in the syllabus is done now. 1.1 is also done. We're left with 1.3, which is the chunky part, okay? Sorry to pause the lesson, guys. Just a quick reminder that a lot of the updates and quick tips that I give before exams and leading up to the exams will be on the Instagram for Tutor Meets TT. I'm going to leave the handle for it here, and on the Facebook as well. But I won't be able to post them on YouTube as often. Sometimes I will, but most of them will be on Instagram. Plus, I do add free worksheets and free notes and Anki's flashcards, a lot of other stuff, free resources on my Instagram. So make sure to follow it. And if you have any questions or any inquiries on how to study and so on, you can also message the page there and I'll try to pick up, or one of the people at Tutor Meets TT. Okay, guys, so let's go back to the video now. So 1.3 is a bit more chunky. It's about features of organisms. It has a lot of sort of complicated concepts, or a lot of memorization more than complicated. So I've made some tables for you guys. Feel free to copy them down or screenshot them and put them into your notes or whatever. Now, you want to state the main features used to place animals and plants into appropriate kingdoms as the first point. And the second point is to state the main features used to place organisms into groups within the animal kingdom, limited to blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're just going to go through these tables that sort of memorize everything, or go over everything, sorry, summarize everything. And yeah, that would be most of them apart from viruses. I didn't make a virus for that because, I didn't make a table for that because you don't really need a table for that. So the tables I've made go through all of this apart from this part of the classification or syllabus. I will go through that on my own and then we can go into the questions, okay? Now let's start with kingdoms. So there are 5 kingdoms you need to know. The way I like to remember this, look at your hand, 5 kingdoms, okay? 5 fingers, 5 kingdoms. Each one, animals, plants, fungi, protoctists, and prokaryotes. A lot of people get these two mixed up and I'm going to clarify them for you, okay? Now the main thing you want to remember is that animals, the differences between animals and plants, for example, is that animals have no cell walls or chloroplasts and feed on organic substances, okay? In terms of plants, they have chloroplasts, which by the way have a substance within them called chlorophyll. This chlorophyll is what makes them green, okay? And they have cell walls made out of cellulose, okay? That's very important to know. And they feed on photosynthesis or by photosynthesis, okay? Now, fungi are usually multicellular. You need to know, by the way, that these 3 are multicellular. That's how I like to remember it. The first 3 are mostly multicellular, okay? Or actually, animals and plants are always multicellular, but fungi is usually multicellular. They have nuclei, cell walls, but the cell walls are not made out of cellulose, okay? That's very important to remember. They do not do photosynthesis. They are saprophytic and parasitic. Saprophytic just means they feed on the dead and the decaying. Parasitic means they feed on the living. Just remember that, guys. And yeah, this is something to remember, that the cell walls are there, but they're not from cellulose. And that's somewhat similar also with these two, okay? The protoctists and prokaryotes. The one thing I want you guys to remember is that protoctists are somewhere in the, sometimes they act like plants, sometimes they act like animals, okay? So sometimes they feed on photosynthesis, sometimes they feed on organic material. whereas prokaryotes are completely different, okay? They have no nucleus or mitochondria, okay, where protoctists have a nucleus, okay? So prokaryotes are special because they have no nucleus, so that's what makes them special. They have no nucleus and no mitochondria, so that's the prokaryotes are special for that reason. That's how I remember them, and protoctists are the ones that are sort of ambiguous. And by the way, guys, when it is said that something has no nucleus, that does not mean it does not have DNA, okay? It would have DNA, but you can imagine it this way. A lot of animal cells would have DNA in here, okay? In the nucleus, but these prokaryotes would have this cell wall first of all, and their DNA would just be something like this, okay? A circular sort of DNA or a loop of DNA in the middle of the cell or in the side or whatever you want to call it, okay? So that's the main differences between the 5 kingdoms. So guys, going into the animal kingdom, you have vertebrates and invertebrates, okay? Now your invertebrates are these 4, okay? Your vertebrates are these 5, okay? We're going to start with the invertebrates. I'm not going to go really into the details. You guys can go ahead and memorize them on your own. It's just going to be a waste of time me going through them. But I would suggest you memorize an example of each, okay? Like insects, 3 pairs of legs. The body is separated in 3 sections. So a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And they have an antennae, okay? And a pair of wings. So a way to remember is to visualize. So visualize an ant having 3 sections. And, for example, 3 pairs of legs. That's your insects. Your arachnids are like spiders. 8 legs, no antennae, okay? And just remember the body is in 2 sections. Cephalothorax and abdomen. These are words you need to know, guys. These are not optional. These are the words you need to know. I don't put extra stuff. Everything here you need to know apart from the examples. I would memorize the examples just because they are easier for me to remember, okay? Now, crustaceans are basically lobsters. They have a cephalothorax and an abdomen and 2 pairs of antennae, okay? So 2 pairs of antennae. That's where they're different to insects. And myriapods are like millipedes. They're like these worms sort of things. And they're multiple repeated segments. So something like this, okay? So they have multiple repeated segments. All right, guys. And 1 pair of antennae. So I would just draw a rough animation or a rough cartoon, sorry, for like if I was doing my notes, I would just draw a rough cartoon beside each one just for me to remember them. But yeah, that's the invertebrates. Now guys, in terms of vertebrates, I wrote most of the things you need to remember, not every single thing. There's more detailed definitions and more details, not definitions, actually features. But I just thought to write the higher yield stuff. Like for mammals, you might also want to say that they have a placenta, okay? Which is basically when the female is pregnant, she develops something called a placenta. It has a lot of objectives, like filtering the baby blood, filtering the blood, from the mother to the baby. But I wrote the most high yield stuff that they were probably going to bring up for you guys in your board exams. Now, things like gills, wet scales, okay, for fish, things like hair or fur, sometimes they call it, or mammary glands, okay, for mammals. Mammary glands are basically just what lactates, okay, so what produces the milk. For reptiles, soft-shelled eggs, that's something you want to remember, compared to birds having hard-shelled eggs, okay? So they're 2 different things. And yeah, I would remember endothermic and exothermic. So these are 2 things that are important also. For example, birds are endothermic. Okay, guys, so this is the important stuff that you need to remember. This table, I would say, just memorize it, okay? Again, memorize it. It's important. Or, to be fair, if you find yourself a person who understands, just memorize the distinguishing features. And with time, as you do more and more questions, you will come across a lot of these features and you'll be able to understand them eventually, okay? Now, the next point in the syllabus is to compare monocots and dicots. For monocots, I would also suggest drawing the cartoon. They are in multiples of 3, parallel veins, and narrow grass-like. So the leaves would look something like this, guys. Okay? The veins, meaning the things that run through. If you've seen a leaf before, you'd see this, okay? The veins would be somewhat like veiny. You see this? They're parallel, okay? And they come in multiples of 3, meaning you would get 3 of those, okay? Like this. and then there's flowers in between it. Okay, obviously I haven't drawn it fully, but you guys get the point. You want to have them straight like this, and then sometimes there's a flower here. Okay, whereas the dicots would be something like multiples of 4. Okay guys, so multiples of 4 or 5, something like this. Okay, and the reticulated meaning, they would be something like this. Okay, rather than just the parallel. So copy that onto the rest of them, and that's what it should look like. Okay guys, so that's mainly the features of monocots and dicots. Now the next thing you need to know, groups within the plant kingdom, is about like ferns and flowering plants. Okay, now ferns are basically these plants that have leaves called fronds. Okay, so their leaves are called fronds, and they do not produce flowers. Okay, so no flowers, and they reproduce by spores. Okay, so I want you guys to remember this. They reproduce by spores, whereas flowering plants, okay, so by the way, these spores would be on the bottom of the fronds. Okay, so they would be on the bottom of them. So flowering plants, on the other hand, they reproduce sexually. All right, so they reproduce sexually, and the seeds are produced inside the ovary. Okay, so there's an ovary which has the seeds being produced there, and that happens inside the flower itself. Okay, so you have a flower. Inside the flower there are these ovaries where seeds are produced. Okay, and these flowering plants are what can be divided into monocots and dicots that we took before. So flowering plants are monocot and dicot. Okay, clear now? Is the classification clear for plants? So you have plants, some of them are called ferns. Ferns have leaves called fronds. These fronds underneath have spores, which is how it replicates. Whereas there are flowering plants, which are both monocots, have a classification under them, which is monocots and dicots, which leaves us with the last thing, which is viruses, before we can go into the questions. Okay, so the viruses are basically something very tricky. They are not considered living organisms, so they do not have the 7 features that we talked about here. If you guys remember, there are 7 features that we talked about, the characteristics of living organisms. Viruses are not living organisms, so they do not have these features. Okay, instead they go and attack the host. They go and use your cells. They have a lot of mechanisms that you learn in A levels, but for now you want to know that they just go and hijack the cell and start using its own systems. Okay, instead of having their own system. So they're not living. They take over a host cell and use its metabolic pathways for them to live and multiplicate. Okay, now the virus is basically a very simple structure. You just need to know a very simple structure for viruses. Okay, so these viruses are basically, let's just zoom in here. They're just a protein. Let me draw a better one for you guys. They're just a protein coat. Okay, they have a protein coat with genetic material inside. Let's say this is the genetic material, okay, which is RNA or DNA. And they have something outside called a protein coat. And that's all you need to know. Okay, they might ask you to label it as the protein coat, but if you go to the specification, they will say limited to protein coat and genetic material. That's all you need to know. So guys, now we're done with the material. We're going to go into the questions. I've put a couple of questions here that we need to go over. You would want to pause the video before we move on, except for the first question. I didn't really explain it unless you want to give it a try without me explaining it, okay? So this is one of the concepts that I didn't explain yet. So you can just move on, or you can wait for me to explain it. Either is fine. And I'm going to be attempting the questions and explaining them with you, okay? So pause the video if you want, and then you can proceed to see the answer, which is hidden behind these black dots, okay? So let's start with the first question. Now, these are all from the extended papers, the paper 2 MCQs for the CIE board again. So the diagram shows a bird that lives near rivers. Use the key to identify the bird shown in the diagram, okay? So question 1 is talking about the classification key that we talked about, guys. Remember it when we talked about here, that they said you need to be able to construct and use dichotomous keys in point number 4 based on identifiable features. So this is a dichotomous key. So they say, first point says toes joined by a flap of skin. So can we zoom in here? Can you see a flap of skin? Yes. So if it's yes, you want to go to 2. If it's no, it means that the toes are separate and the answer is A. Okay? So since yes, it is joined by flaps of skin, we're going to go to point 2. The beak as long or longer than the head. It is longer than the head. So you want to go to 3. Top of head is black. Is the top of head black? Yes. Is the top of head white? No. So it must be C. So it's an avocat or an avocet, whatever you want to call it. Correct answer. Okay? A lot of people get mistaken and don't understand how to use it. It's really straightforward. Hopefully it's clear now. You can answer any question. By the way, if you guys have any question at any point, you want to comment it, go ahead and comment it, and I'll try to answer any of the questions that you guys pose. Now moving on to question 2, the table shows the scientific names and the common names of 4 plants. Which word in their names shows that the 2 of the plants share the greatest number of features? We're going to have to look at the scientific name for this, guys. Now we're going to be looking for the closest thing here. So we can see here that the genus is the same for these 2 and that the species are the same for these 2. Now in this case, you would go for the genus because that means they share more features, okay? So the genus is the right option, and that is C. So moving on to question 3, guys. Which class of vertebrates does organism W belong to? Now, organism W is this one. It has no scales, no feathers, no legs, okay? So if it has no scales, it can't be a reptile. Okay, oops, I showed the answer here. And it can't be a fish. Now it has no feathers, so it's not a bird, it has to be an amphibian. Okay, guys, so this is called the elimination method. You want to be using this. Question 4 now is talking about the diagram shows some leaves and flowers of different plants, which are from monocots. Now, this is 4 leaves, so that means it's a dicot, right? These, look at the ways the veins are, okay? So they are not parallel, so this is wrong, this is wrong. So we're left with 1 and 5, which means it's B. What are the characteristics of bony fish? Scales, yes, they have scales, so option A and C are wrong. Okay, external ears. Last time I checked fish, they don't have external ears. Jelly covered eggs, perhaps. Maintain constant body temperature. Now this is a question a lot of people get wrong. Fish do not maintain a constant body temperature. They are dependent on the temperature of the water you put them in, okay, or that the water that they exist in. That's why if you put fish in very hot water, they might die, okay, or in very cold water, they might die. And they do have jelly covered eggs, okay, so the option that's correct here is D. Okay, so it's option D. Now, what are the features of the leaves of a plant that is a dicot? Now this is another name for dicot. They have broad leaves or parallel veins. Now broad leaves, they do have broad leaves instead of these pointy looking leaves, and they have parallel veins, which is, no, they don't have parallel veins actually, that's for the monocots, right? So they don't have parallel veins and they have broad leaves, so option B is the correct answer. Next question. All fish, all birds, and all mammals are carnivores, vertebrates, warm-blooded animals, animals with internal fertilization. Has to be vertebrates, guys. Easy question here. Growth is a characteristic feature of all living organisms. Which process provides the energy for growth? Clearly, energy for growth, okay, will be respiration. We talked about this. It releases energy from metabolism. You can see here. We talked about this. If we go up here, respiration is right here, as the chemical reaction in cells that breaks down nutrient molecules and releases energy for metabolism. Okay, guys, so it's for metabolism. So right here we can see the question is asking us which process provides the energy for growth. That one will be respiration. Okay, so C. Now, which processes provide the raw materials needed for tissue repair? Now, the raw materials means the things that you make up the tissues from, which is from nutrition, okay? C. Moving on to the table. This is just a table you guys should fill up on your free time. I'm going to fill it up quickly for you guys. So read the question always. It says complete the table, put a tick if you indicate that the group shows the feature, and X if it doesn't. Okay, so scaly skin. Bony fish has scaly skin, amphibians don't have scaly skins, reptiles do, these don't, mammals don't. Okay, so you can check that. It's a tick X, that is correct. Okay, ear, external ear and pinna. Okay, so bony fish don't, amphibians don't, reptiles do they or do they not? They don't, mammals do. Okay, so it's something special to mammals. That's something you need to remember. Feathers. Last time I checked, fish, they don't have feathers, don't have feathers, don't have feathers. Oops. Yep, they don't have feathers, they don't have feathers. None of them have feathers, okay, except for birds, which they've done for us. Mammary glands, okay. Obviously, all of them won't except for mammals, okay. That's a straightforward table, guys. This would have given you 4 marks in your board exams. Really easy, 4 marks. Now, that's the end of the questions for today. There's a lot more questions you guys can do, especially about DNA. We didn't really get to do those, like these type of questions. But using the explanations that we've done, you should be able to do all of them. And that would be the end of the video, guys. Again, if you haven't followed the Instagram and the Facebook, that's where a lot of the updates will be. Go ahead and follow them. I've put the tags for them. And I've put the syllabus in the description and some resources there as well. If you guys liked the video, subscribe, like, and make sure to watch the rest of the playlist before your board exams and the past paper walkthroughs. Thank you guys. That's the end of the video, and good luck with your exams.